Breaking News Part 2. The award show whisper when a single breath became a story. The Golden Lotus Awards were never quiet. They were spectacles of light and grandeur, where the country's brightest stars paraded across red carpets as cameras snapped like gunfire. For actors, it was a night of recognition. For fans, it was a night of fantasy. But for Wang, Churan, and Zhang Linghe, it was something else entirely. A stage where the eyes of the world could catch the smallest crack in the mask they wore so carefully. The arrival. The evening began with flashbulbs. Churan arrived in a flowing champagne-colored gown that clung to her like liquid silk. The gown's off-shoulder cut framed her delicate collarbones, and as she stepped out of the car, the crowd gasped. She glided across the carpet like a vision, her smile poised, her wave practiced, yet her eyes carrying that quiet warmth fans loved her for. Minutes later, Zhang Linghe stepped out of his own car. He wore a fitted black suit, the kind of cut that looked effortless but had clearly been tailored with precision. The sharp lines of his shoulders, the understated sheen of the fabric. He was elegance personified. The red carpet cameras caught it immediately, the way her entrance lingered in his eyes when he walked past. He didn't look directly at her, but the angle of his head, the almost imperceptible softening of his expression, betrayed him to anyone who cared to notice. And fans noticed everything. The ceremony begins. Inside, the hall glowed with chandeliers and soft golden light. Stars filled the velvet seats, whispers rippling like waves across the aisles. Churan sat toward the center, her posture regal, her smile flawless as cameras occasionally panned her way. Linghe was placed 2 rows behind, diagonal enough that from the right angle, his gaze could fall on her without being obvious. But it was obvious to those who knew how to look. Between applause and silence, awards ceremonies have their rhythms, bursts of clapping, crescendos of music, then the long stretches of waiting. It was during one of these lulls, just after a commercial break, that the moment happened. Wang Churan had stood to stretch her legs, gliding toward the aisle with a grace that made every movement seem rehearsed. As she passed the aisle where Zhang Linghe sat, something subtle shifted. He leaned forward. Not much, just enough so that when she walked past, his shoulder brushed lightly against hers. She paused, surprised, turning her head slightly toward him. And then, the whisper. The cameras didn't catch what he said. They couldn't. The microphones were too far. The noise of the audience too thick. But those sitting nearby saw the way his lips moved, his face tilted just close enough to her ear that the words belonged to her alone. Her reaction was immediate. A startled intake of breath. A small, involuntary smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. She tapped his arm lightly, a gesture that seemed both playful and chastising. Then, with a composure only she could muster, she continued walking. But her cheeks, in that moment, carried the faintest flush. The internet explodes. Of course, a behind-the-scenes camera caught it. Not the words, but the motion, his lean, her tone, the whisper that lingered between them. Within hours, the clip was everywhere. Fan accounts slowed it down, zoomed in, replayed it frame by frame. Look at the way she smiles after. Did she blush? What did he say? Someone read his lips. Theories bloomed like wildfire. Some claimed he had congratulated her on a nomination. Others swore he whispered, "You look beautiful tonight." The bolder ones insisted it was something even more daring. What the audience saw, but what the cameras didn't fully capture was the moment after. Churan took her seat again, the hem of her gown pooling gracefully around her. She kept her eyes on the stage, but every so often, they flickered, just for a second, in Linghe's direction. And when their gazes met, even briefly, it was as if the noise of the entire hall dimmed. He didn't smile widely, didn't break the facade of formality, but his eyes held something steady, something only she seemed to understand. The whisper replayed. Later that night, an industry insider swore she heard fragments of what was said. Passing by the aisle at that exact moment, she caught his voice, low and deliberate. "Don't forget to breathe." A simple phrase, but in the weight of the evening, in the tension of cameras and expectations, it carried intimacy. It wasn't something a colleague would say. It was something someone said when they noticed everything about you. even the way you were holding your breath under the lights. Backstage, after her award category was announced, and though she didn't win, the cameras caught her smiling graciously, applauding the victor. Yet backstage, she slipped into a quieter corridor to collect herself. The walls back there were narrow, the hum of the crowd muffled by heavy curtains. She leaned against the wall for a second, fingertips grazing the fabric of her gown. And then, he was there. Hey, Linghe's voice was soft, almost cautious. You were incredible. She exhaled, shaking her head. I didn't win. He stepped closer, his expression firm but gentle. You don't need the trophy. They already know. For a moment, they just stood there, silent, stretching, the faint applause from the main hall seeping in like distant waves. Then, as footsteps echoed nearby, they straightened instantly, masks back on, distance re-established. But the look they exchanged in that fleeting second was enough to tell the truth. The whisper at the awards wasn't a fluke. It was a crack in the wall they'd both been holding up. The world keeps guessing. The clip of the whisper trended for days. Entertainment shows dissected it endlessly. Some anchors chuckled, dismissing it as harmless banter. Others leaned into the speculation, spinning headlines. A secret words between Wang, Churan, and Zhang Linghe. A award show or love show. A chemistry too real to ignore. Their studios, as always, released no statements. Silence was their strategy. And silence, in this case, was louder than denial. The last look of the night. As the ceremony drew to a close, cameras caught them one last time, the crowd rising for the final bow, applause thundering through the hall. Churan stood in the center of a row, Linghe a few paces behind. For a split second, as the audience clapped, their eyes found each other across the room. It was fleeting, buried in the chaos, invisible to most. But to those who saw it, the tiny nod he gave, the way her lips curved almost imperceptibly, it felt like a secret farewell. The kind that promised another hello. Why that whisper matters. In a night filled with speeches, music, and noise, the moment that people remembered wasn't the grand performances or glittering gowns. It was a lean, a breath, a few unheard words. Because sometimes, it isn't the declaration that matters. It's the whisper. The words too private for cameras, meant for one person alone. The night was heavy with stillness. Most of the crew had long since packed up, their laughter and chatter fading into the distance as the studio lot grew quiet. The floodlights that had bathed the set in a harsh glow were dimming one by one, leaving only scattered pools of amber light along the wide, empty road. Wang Churan's final scene had taken everything out of her. She moved slowly, still half in costume, her body weighed down not just by the ornate fabric but by exhaustion itself. The air was cool, laced with the faint smell of rain from earlier in the evening. She adjusted the folds of her robe and exhaled. She expected to walk alone, to let the quiet of the night swallow her whole. But as she stepped out of the studio gates, she froze. Someone was waiting. The waiting figure. Zhang Linghe stood beneath a flickering streetlight, his hands tucked into the pockets of his dark coat. He wasn't scrolling through his phone or pretending to look busy. He was just there, waiting. The sight startled her at first. "You're still here?" she asked, her voice carrying across the empty lot. He smiled faintly, that calm, almost unshakable kind of smile that seemed to say he had all the time in the world. "I thought I'd walk with you." She blinked, caught off guard. "It's past midnight. You should have gone home." "Maybe," he admitted, "but I didn't feel like it." Falling into step. She hesitated only a moment before starting down the road. He fell into step beside her, his strides instinctively slowing to match hers. Neither of them spoke at first. Their footsteps echoed faintly against the asphalt, mingling with the distant hum of city traffic beyond the studio walls. The night stretched around them, wide and endless. And yet, it didn't feel empty. The first exchange. "You didn't have to wait," she said again after a while, her tone softer this time. "I wanted to," he replied. The simplicity of the answer unnerved her more than anything. He didn't try to explain, didn't add layers of excuses. Just "I wanted to." She glanced at him from the corner of her eye. His profile was sharp under the streetlights, his hair still damp from the evening's earlier rain scene. There was no trace of weariness on his face, though she knew he had wrapped his own scenes hours ago. "Does your manager know you're still here?" she asked. He chuckled. "I told him to go home. I didn't want to be fussed over." The brush of hands. As they walked, their arms occasionally swung close enough for their hands to brush. The first time, she thought it was accidental. The second time, she wasn't so sure. By the third, her heartbeat betrayed her. She kept her gaze forward, pretending not to notice, though every nerve in her hands seemed alive, waiting. Linghe, for his part, said nothing, but his silence carried weight, like he knew exactly what he was doing. The conversation they didn't mean to have. Halfway down the lot, she sighed, her voice almost swallowed by the night. "Do you ever feel trapped? Like all of this, the lights, the cameras, the endless eyes on us, it never stops." He looked at her, his expression thoughtful. "Yes, all the time." She didn't expect the honesty. Most people, when asked, would dodge, smile, give the safe answer. But not him. "And what do you do when you feel that way?" she pressed. "I find something real," he said simply. She stopped walking, turning to face him. "And what's real to you, John Linghe?" For a long beat, he just looked at her. The faint glow from the nearest lamp lit his eyes, making them seem darker, deeper. Finally, he said, "This. Right now." Her breath caught. The laugh that broke the tension. Perhaps sensing the heaviness of the moment, she laughed suddenly. A light, musical sound that echoed down the empty street. "You're dangerous. You know that." He tilted his head, amused. "Why?" "Because you say things like that and pretend it's nothing." "Who says I'm pretending?" The laughter caught in her throat. She shook her head, quickening her pace as if to escape the weight of his words. He easily matched her stride again, unbothered. The forgotten world. The road stretched ahead, lined with tall studio buildings that now looked like silent giants in the dark. The rest of the world felt distant. Their managers, their schedules, the constant speculation of fans online. Out here, there was only the sound of their steps and the faint rustle of wind through the trees at the edge of the lot. It felt like they were walking in a world carved out just for them. The small gesture. At one point, she shivered slightly. The night air had grown colder, and the thin fabric of her costume offered little warmth. Without hesitation, Linghe shrugged off his coat and draped it over her shoulders. "You don't have to." "Stop saying that," he interrupted gently. "Let me take care of you, just a little." The coat was warm, carrying the faint scent of his cologne, something woody, subtle, grounding. She pulled it tighter around herself, silently grateful. The studio gates. Eventually, they reached the gates where their cars waited. The drivers stood at a respectful distance, their figures barely visible in the dim light. She slowed, reluctant to let the moment end. "Well, here we are." "Here we are," he echoed. For a second, neither moved. She fiddled with the edge of his coat, unsure if she should give it back. He noticed and shook his head. "Keep it. You'll catch cold otherwise." Their eyes locked, and in that instant, it felt as though everything unsaid between them hovered in the air, thick and electric. The almost. He stepped just slightly closer, close enough that she could see the faint droplets still clinging to his hairline. Close enough that if she leaned forward even an inch, their foreheads would touch. Her breath hitched. His hand lifted, slowly, hesitantly, as if he might brush a strand of hair from her face. But then, a voice cut through the stillness. "Miss Wang, the car is ready." They both froze. The spell shattered. He lowered his hand, retreating half a step. She exhaled, forcing a small smile. "Good night, Linghe." "Good night, Churan," he replied softly. The memory that lingers. Later, in the backseat of her car, she pulled his coat tighter around her, staring out at the blur of city lights as the driver pulled away. She could still feel the echo of his hand brushing hers, the weight of his whisper in the dark. This. Right now. And though the night had ended, the walk remained, imprinted in her memory like a secret too precious to share. For him, back in his own car, the silence was filled only with her laugh, the one she couldn't hold back when she accused him of being dangerous.